Have you ever stood at your husband's graveside and had another woman walk up to you claiming to be his wife? Have you ever discovered that the man you'd shared your bed with for decades had an entire second family you knew nothing about? My name is Margaret, and 3 weeks ago at my husband's funeral, I met the woman he'd been married to for the past 15 years. If you've ever felt like your entire life was a lie, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It started with a phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was tending to my rose garden when my phone rang. Unknown number. At 72, you learn to answer every call because it might be important. Is this Margaret Henderson? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. Yes, this is Margaret. Ma'am, I'm calling from Memorial Hospital in Tampa. I'm very sorry to inform you that your husband, Robert Henderson, passed away last night. The world stopped. I actually felt my knees give out, and I had to sit down on my garden bench. I'm sorry, what? Robert is dead? Yes, ma'am. He was brought in yesterday evening after suffering a massive heart attack. I'm so sorry for your loss. I couldn't breathe. Robert was supposed to be on a business trip in Florida. He'd left Sunday morning, kissed me goodbye, said he'd be back Thursday. When and where is the funeral? I managed to ask. The funeral arrangements are being handled by Sunset Memorial Gardens in Tampa. The service is tomorrow at 2 p.m. I spent that day in shock, making travel arrangements. I called Robert's nephew Thomas to let him know I was coming. Aunt Margaret? I didn't know Uncle Robert had given you the details. The hospital called me. I'm his wife, Thomas. Of course. I'll see you tomorrow. I flew to Tampa the next morning and took a taxi to Sunset Memorial Gardens. When I arrived, I saw about 50 people gathered around a gravesite. I didn't recognize most of them. I walked toward the front of the gathering, looking for Thomas. That's when I saw her. A woman about my age, maybe 65, standing in the front row wearing a black dress and a widow's veil. She was clearly devastated, positioned like she belonged there. I approached her slowly. Excuse me, I said quietly. I'm Margaret Henderson, Robert's wife. The woman looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. For a moment, she just stared. Then her expression changed to confusion. I'm sorry, what did you say? I'm Margaret, Robert's wife. We've been married for 35 years. Her face went white. That's impossible. I'm Robert's wife. I'm Linda Henderson. We've been married for 15 years. The world tilted. I felt like I was going to faint. What do you mean you're his wife? Robert is my husband. We got married in 2009. We live together in Tampa. I stared at this woman, this Linda, who was claiming to be married to my husband. She looked as shocked as I felt. There must be some mistake, I said. Robert and I have been married since 1989. We live in Ohio. Linda shook her head slowly. Robert Henderson, the accountant? Born in 1952? Yes, but he lives on Maple Street in Ohio, with me. We stared at each other in horror as the truth began to dawn on both of us. Other people at the funeral were starting to notice our conversation. Ladies, is everything all right? A man approached us. Linda, who is this? Linda looked at him with tears streaming down her face. George, this woman says she's married to Robert. George looked at me with confusion. Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Robert was married to Linda. And I was at our wedding 35 years ago, I said. A small crowd was forming around us. I could hear whispers and murmurs. This is impossible, Linda said, her voice breaking. Robert can't be married to both of us. But even as she said it, I could see in her eyes that she was beginning to understand the same thing I was. Robert had been living two lives. How often was Robert home? I asked Linda quietly. She wiped her eyes. He travelled for work constantly. He was gone about half the year, said he had clients all over the country. My heart sank. He told me the same thing. We looked at each other with growing horror. Robert had been splitting his time between us, telling each of us that work kept him away when he was actually living with another wife. Thomas pushed through the people, looking confused. Aunt Margaret. What's going on? Thomas, this woman says she's married to Robert too. Thomas looked back and forth between Linda and me. That can't be right. Thomas, Linda said, you know me. I'm your Uncle Robert's wife. But Aunt Margaret has been married to Uncle Robert my whole life, Thomas said, looking lost. Have you ever seen us together? I asked Thomas. Linda and me in the same place? Thomas thought about it. No, never. Uncle Robert always said you two didn't get along, so he visited you separately. Linda and I looked at each other. Even his family had been part of the elaborate deception. The minister was trying to get everyone's attention to start the service, but the crowd was focused on the drama between the two widows. I think we need to see some identification, someone said. Linda pulled out her driver's license. Linda Henderson, Bayshore Drive, Tampa. I pulled out mine. Margaret Henderson, Maple Street, Cleveland, Ohio. Both licenses clearly showed us as married to Robert Henderson. This is unbelievable, George said. How could Robert be married to two women? Bigamy, someone else said. The funeral director insisted we proceed with the service. When it came time for family to speak, both Linda and I stood up. I think Linda should go first, I said quietly. But you've been his wife longer, Linda replied. I stood at the podium and looked out at the confused faces. My name is Margaret Henderson, and I've been married to Robert for 35 years. Today I learned that he was also married to Linda for 15 years. I don't understand how he managed to live two lives, but I know that he caused tremendous pain to both of us. I looked at Linda, who was crying silently. Robert was my husband, but he was also Linda's husband. We're both his widows, and we're both victims of his lies. Linda stood up next. Robert was my husband for 15 years, and I loved him completely. I never knew about Margaret. We've both been betrayed, but we've also both lost the man we loved. After the service, Linda and I found ourselves alone by Robert's grave. What do we do now? Linda asked. I don't know. I don't even know what my legal status is. I have a marriage certificate from 2009. I have one from 1989. But if he was already married to you, then my marriage was never legal. We stood there in silence, two women trying to figure out the mess Robert had left behind. That evening, Linda invited me to dinner. We sat in a quiet restaurant, two strangers who'd shared the same man without knowing it. Tell me about your life with Robert, Linda said. We lived quietly in Ohio. He worked as an accountant, traveled constantly for business. We never had children. What about you? Almost the same. He worked here in Tampa, but traveled for clients. We never had children either. He said he was too old to start a family when we met. How did you meet him? At a conference in 2008. He was charming. Said he'd never found the right woman to settle down with. What about you? We met in 1988. He said the exact same thing. We realized Robert had used the same story, the same charm, the same lies with both of us. Did he ever mention family? I asked. Just Thomas. Said his parents were dead, no siblings. He told me the same thing. Linda reached into her purse. I brought some photos. Maybe we can piece together the timeline. She showed me pictures of their wedding in 2009. Robert looked exactly the same as he had in our wedding photos from 1989. Look at this, Linda said, showing me a photo from Christmas 2015. This was taken at our house. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo from the same Christmas. This was taken at our house in Ohio. Same day. We stared at the photos. Robert celebrating Christmas with two different wives, probably just hours apart. How did he manage this? Linda asked. The traveling. He'd tell me he had to work Christmas Day for an emergency client. He'd leave Christmas morning. And he'd tell me he had to fly out Christmas evening for a client meeting. We spent hours comparing stories, filling in the gaps of Robert's double life. He'd been meticulous in his deception, careful never to overlap his time with us. Did you ever suspect? Linda asked. Never. I trusted him completely. Did you? No. He was so convincing, so devoted when he was home. The next day, we met with a lawyer together. Eleanor Mitchell specialized in estate law. Ladies, this is a very unusual situation. Based on what you've told me, Robert committed bigamy, which is a felony. What does that mean for us? I asked. Margaret, your marriage in 1989 was legal. Linda, your marriage in 2009 was not legally valid since Robert was already married. Linda's face fell. So I was never really his wife? Not legally, no. But you may still have rights as a common law partner depending on Florida law. What about his estate? I asked. Margaret, as his legal widow, you're entitled to his estate. However, Linda may have claims for support or compensation. We spent the next week going through Robert's belongings together. It was surreal. Two women sorting through the possessions of a man who'd deceived us both. In his office, we found evidence of his careful planning. 2 sets of financial records, 2 insurance policies, 2 lives maintained in parallel. Look at this, Linda said, holding up a calendar. He marked your weeks in blue and my weeks in red. I stared at the calendar. Our entire marriage reduced to color-coded blocks of time. 35 years, I said quietly. 35 years of thinking I knew him. 15 years for me. But I feel just as betrayed. We found his journal in the desk drawer. The entries painted a picture of a man who enjoyed the challenge of maintaining 2 lives. I like having 2 homes, 2 wives who both think they're the only one. It keeps life interesting. Neither of them suspects anything. Margaret is getting older and more dependent. Linda is younger and more independent. Between the 2 of them, I get everything I need. Sometimes I almost forget which wife I'm with. I have to be careful not to call Linda by Margaret's name. I closed the journal. He thought this was a game. We were just entertainment to him, Linda said. We decided to settle the estate amicably. Linda would receive a substantial settlement that reflected her 15 years with Robert, and I would keep the Ohio house and the remainder of his assets. I don't want to fight you, Linda told me as we signed the settlement papers. We're both victims here. You loved him too, and you spent 15 years building what you thought was a real marriage. I can't take everything when he deceived us both. You know what's strange? Linda said. I keep thinking about all the times he seemed distracted or distant. Now I know why. He was thinking about you, planning his next trip to Ohio, managing his other life. I thought those moments meant he was stressed about work. I'd try to comfort him, make his favorite meals, give him space to relax. I was unknowingly helping him recover from the stress of lying to me. We both did that. We both took care of him, supported him, made his double life easier without knowing it. The legal process took several months, but it gave us time to process everything we'd learned. We met regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to walk and talk. Two women trying to make sense of how we'd been so thoroughly deceived. I keep wondering if there were signs I missed, Linda said during one of our walks. I've been thinking about that too. Looking back, there were things that seemed odd, but I always found explanations for them. Like what? He never wanted me to meet his co-workers. Said it would be unprofessional to mix personal and business relationships. He never wanted pictures of us on social media. Said he was old-fashioned and private. He told me the same things. And he was always careful about his phone. Said he needed to keep work and personal life separate, so he had specific times when he'd check messages. I thought I was being supportive by respecting his boundaries. I had no idea he was using those boundaries to hide an entire other life. Do you think he planned this from the beginning? Linda asked. I don't know. Maybe he started with small lies and they just grew bigger over time. Or maybe he always intended to live this way. What scares me is how good he was at it. If he hadn't died, we might never have found out. That thought haunted me. How long would Robert have continued his double life? Years? Decades? Would we have grown old and died never knowing about each other? 6 months after Robert's death, Linda and I had developed an unlikely friendship. We met once a month, sometimes more often. Two women bonded by the shared experience of loving and losing the same man. Do you miss him? Linda asked during one of our visits. I miss the man I thought he was. The Robert, who existed only when he was with me. Do you? Same. I miss the version of Robert who was devoted and loving and present. But knowing what I know now, I realize that Robert was just a performance. He was acting the part of a loving husband. Do you think he loved either of us? I think he loved the comfort we provided. The companionship, the care, the feeling of being important to someone. But I don't think he loved us as individuals. I think he loved the role we played in his life. Sometimes I wonder if he saw us as interchangeable, two women providing the same services to him. That's what hurts the most. Not that he lied, but that we were so easily replaceable, that our individual personalities, our quirks, our differences didn't matter to him. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Williams, who specialized in helping older adults process complex grief and betrayal. Margaret, what you're experiencing is called ambiguous loss, she explained during one of our sessions. You're grieving not just Robert's death, but the death of the relationship you thought you had. You're mourning a marriage that, in many ways, never really existed. How do I process loving someone who was lying to me for so long? Your love was real, even if the relationship wasn't what you thought it was. Robert's deception doesn't invalidate your feelings or the care you provided. You were genuine in your love, even if he wasn't genuine in return. I feel so foolish for not seeing the signs. Robert was practicing a form of psychological manipulation that experts call compartmentalization. He was skilled at keeping different parts of his life completely separate. Most people wouldn't have detected this level of deception. What about Linda? Should I feel guilty about the friendship we've developed? Your friendship with Linda is actually quite healthy. You're both survivors of the same manipulation. Supporting each other through this process is a positive way to heal. Dr. Williams helped me understand that what Robert had done was a form of elder abuse, using my trust and love to maintain financial and emotional control over my life. He used your loyalty against you, she explained. He knew you would respect his privacy, trust his decisions, and support his choices. He weaponized your good qualities to maintain his deception. A year after Robert's death, I was living a different life in Ohio. I'd completely redecorated the house, removing all traces of Robert and making it truly mine for the first time. I'd planted new flowers in the garden, ones that I chose without considering Robert's preferences. Linda had moved to a smaller apartment in Tampa and started dating again. She'd met a widower named Frank, who was completely transparent about his past, his finances, and his daily life. "I've learned to ask questions," she told me during one of our phone calls. "I verify things. I meet his friends and family. I look at his bank statements. I know it sounds unromantic, but I need to know that what I'm seeing is real. I don't think I'll ever trust anyone that completely again," I admitted. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe Robert taught us that blind trust isn't love, it's vulnerability. I used to think that questioning someone meant you didn't love them. Now I know that real love can survive questions. If someone gets defensive about transparency, that's a red flag. We both learned that love shouldn't require you to be blind. Real love can survive scrutiny, questions, and verification. The right person will understand your need for honesty and will welcome the opportunity to prove their trustworthiness. Robert had taught us, in the cruelest way possible, that trust should be earned and maintained through consistent actions, not simply given as a gift and never questioned. At 73, I was finally learning to be content with my own company. I'd spent so many decades defining myself as Robert's wife that I'd forgotten who Margaret Henderson was as an individual. I started volunteering at a senior center, helping other women navigate legal and financial issues after the loss of a spouse. I found deep purpose in helping others avoid the traps I'd fallen into. The most important thing, I told the women in my support group, is to stay involved in your own life. Don't let anyone else handle everything just because it's easier or because they claim to know better. Don't trust so completely that you stop paying attention to your own affairs. "But how do you balance trust with vigilance?" one woman asked. "Trust, but verify," I said. "Real partners will understand your need for transparency. They'll welcome questions because they have nothing to hide. It's the people with secrets who get angry when you ask for honesty." I shared my story with the group, and I was amazed by how many women had similar experiences. Not all as extreme as mine, but many had discovered that their deceased husbands had hidden assets, secret debts, or had made financial decisions without their knowledge. "We were raised to trust our husbands completely," said Eleanor, a woman in her 80s. "We thought questioning them meant we didn't respect them." "But respect is different from blind faith," I replied. "You can respect someone and still expect transparency." Linda and I met for coffee one final time before she moved to North Carolina to be closer to her daughter. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "The years with Robert?" I thought about it carefully. I regret the deception. I regret that he stole 35 years of honest living from me, but I don't regret being capable of love. Even loving someone who didn't deserve it. Especially loving someone who didn't deserve it. Because that means I was capable of real, unconditional love. Robert was capable of real deception. There's a difference, and I'd rather be someone who loves too much than someone who deceives. Linda smiled. "You're stronger than you know, Margaret." So are you. We both survived something that could have destroyed us. We found friendship in the wreckage of his lies. Robert had tried to make us both victims of his elaborate deception. But in the end, we'd survived his betrayal and found strength we didn't know we had. We'd turned his attempt to divide us into a bond that helped us both heal. I never remarried, not because I was afraid of love, but because I learned that being alone with integrity is better than being with someone who makes you feel alone through their deception. At 74, I'm content with the life I've built on truth rather than lies. The roses in my garden bloom more beautifully each spring, tended by hands that belong to a woman who finally understands her own worth and refuses to accept less than complete honesty from the people in her life. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.